Hello, friends. Welcome to another Silly Spooky Story Songs episode. In this episode, I am sharing a story called Lydia. Do you know the story of the girl in the rain? She stands by the tracks, looks like she's in pain. Try to take her home that rainy night, but suddenly she's gone out of sight. There was a boy named Thomas. He was known as Tom to his friends. He was a nice boy, and he was all dressed up and ready to go to his school dance. Even though he didn't have a date, he was happy. He was excited, and he had taken time to look his best. He also took time to make sure his car was in perfect shape. Even though his car wasn't new, it wasn't old either. It was just not new and kind of in between. But it was still a nice looking car, especially now that he had it all washed and he had all the oil changed, the gas filled up. He had got a tune up. It was really in good shape. And he thought, well, maybe I might meet a girl at the dance and maybe I might be able to give her a ride home. And maybe I can impress her with how nice my car looks and how nice I look in this suit. So he was happy. And he was also happy to hang out with his friends. Because regardless of what happened, he knew he was going to have a good time. So he got into his car and he thought, wow, it's raining and it's dark. So I think I'm going to take a shortcut tonight. So he decided to take a road that he took frequently when he was going to school because many times he would oversleep and he knew he needed to get to school on time because he was a good kid. He was a good boy. And so he found this shortcut. And this was the first time he had actually driven the shortcut at night. But because of the rain and because he knew it was dark and it was kind of hard to see, he thought, I better drive a little slower. And so that means it's going to take a little longer for me to get to the school. So if I take this shortcut, I should be able to get there in time for the dance. And the shortcut had a little bend in it that was kind of tricky. And if you weren't really familiar with that road, and if you weren't driving carefully, you could actually get in an accident. But he drove it nice and careful. And when he went around the bend, there was the railroad tracks. And usually he could just drive right over them and get to the school, which was just close by, right on the other side. However, for some reason, tonight, as soon as he got to those railroad tracks, his car stopped. There was no sputtering. There was no indication that anything was wrong. It just suddenly stopped and would not go. And no matter how much he tried to turn the key and tried to do whatever he could not get the car going. So, lucky for him, he had brought a flashlight. He always carried a flashlight just in case he had to change a tire or something happened like this situation. So he got his flashlight, he got out, popped the hood, and was just about to look under the hood to see what was wrong, even though he knew there was nothing wrong because he had just got a tune up. He saw someone standing in the rain, someone he hadn't seen before and probably would not have seen if his car had not stopped right there at the railroad tracks. It was a girl. She looked like she was all dressed and ready to go to the dance. She had shoulder length, very light blonde hair, and she looked pretty, but she was getting very wet, and she was looking at him like she wanted some help. So Tom, being a nice boy, and also noticing that she possibly was going to the same dance that he was, he walked over to her and introduced himself. And he said, "Why are you standing here in the rain? Did something happen to your car?" "Yes," she said, "I was driving to the dance and my car crashed into a tree. I guess I just didn't notice the tree right there because of all the rain. So, could you please give me a ride to the dance?" "Sure," said Tom. And so he let her into his car and he asked her name, and she said, "My name is Lydia." And she was very quiet, very nice. He noticed she was wearing a pretty blue dress that matched her pretty blue eyes, but he also noticed that the dress looked a little old fashioned, but it was still pretty, and she was very pretty. In fact, he thought she was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. He also liked her manner. She was very nice. She was quiet, but she was polite, and she was very nice. He said, "You know, it's kind of strange how my car just died right at the railroad tracks. I wouldn't have even seen you if that hadn't happened." And she kind of smiled. And then he said, "It was also strange how I could not get it to turn on until I let you in the car. And then as soon as I turned the key, the ignition started. It's like you're magic or something." She smiled and kind of laughed. And then they just went on to the dance. When they got there, Tom's friends were surprised because they thought he wasn't going to have a date, but there he was with this pretty girl. In fact, a very pretty girl. They didn't even notice that her dress was old fashioned because she was so nice and she was so pretty. He introduced her as his friend Lydia. And as they danced, there were several other boys, especially his friends, who wanted to dance with her. But she politely said no, she wanted to dance with Tom. He was the only one she danced with all night, and they seemed to really like each other. Tom was thinking, wow, this night's went better than I thought. After the dance was over, he asked to take her home, and of course she said yes. And as they were driving, he said, "Well, where do you live? I don't even remember seeing you around school." And she said, "Well, I kind of live out in the country, kind of the outskirts of town." It was a street that he had never heard of, but she gave very good directions, so he was able to find her house, even in the dark and the rain. When they got there, he said, "Well, I've had a really nice time tonight." And she said, "Me too." And she looked kind of sad, like she didn't want to go home, like she didn't want the night to end, like maybe she thought she wasn't going to see him again. "Well, now that I know where your house is, maybe I could come over and see you sometime. Maybe we'll see each other at school." She smiled and she said, "Well, it's late now. I better get inside." So he said, "Well, I'll walk you to your door." He got out and went over to the passenger side and was about to open her door, but she wasn't there. She had vanished. He looked all around. He didn't see her anywhere. Well, how could she have gotten out so quickly? He thought. Maybe she just ran inside because it was raining. So he walked up to the door to make sure she was okay and she had gotten inside. When he knocked on the door, he heard what sounded like an old lady saying, "Yes." And then she opened the door, and she was an old lady. He was surprised because he thought Lydia's mother would have been a little younger. Well, maybe she's her grandmother, is what he thought. I was just wondering if a girl named Lydia had came inside. I brought her home from the dance, and she said this was her house, but I didn't see her go inside, so I just wanted to make sure that she was safe. The woman looked at him and smiled kind of sadly, and she said, "Did she have a blue dress on? And did she have shoulder length, pretty blonde hair and pretty blue eyes? And was her name Lydia?" "Yes," said Tom. "That's my daughter," said the woman, and he was kind of surprised. "She's been dead for 20 years." "What?" Tom said. "Yes, she was on her way to a school dance, and it was raining and dark, and she crashed her car into a tree, and she died. And every night when it's raining and when there's a school dance, she stands by the railroad tracks and waits for someone to come. She goes to the dance with them and asks them to bring her home, but she never gets inside. She never makes it into the house. She just disappears." "Hmm," thought Tom. Well, he said a polite, kind of awkward good night and walked to his car, puzzled about the whole situation. He drove home thinking about it. And he thought, well, I can't tell this to the guys. No one is going to believe me. And I don't even know if I believe it myself. But where did she go? I didn't see her anywhere. How did she vanish? And how did I know where this house was if she wasn't really there with me? I know she was there. I know she was real. But where did she go? I guess he would never know. But he would never forget that night, that dance, and especially that girl in the old fashioned blue dress with the pretty shoulder length blonde hair and big blue eyes named Lydia.